Amara was breathing hard by the time she reached the narrow stick bridge that crossed the river outside the village. A heavy bundle of cassava sticks rested painfully on her small head, forcing her tiny legs to shake with every careful step she took across the weak, bending wood. The evening wind blew strongly against her torn dress, while the muddy river rushed noisily beneath her bare feet. From a distance, the men fishing downstream could already hear the frightened sniffing of the child as she struggled to balance the load that was clearly too heavy for someone her age. But Amara kept moving anyway, because in the house she came from, children who complained about pain were often reminded they were lucky to even have somewhere to sleep. Then it happened. One of the slippery sticks beneath her foot cracked suddenly. Amara lost balance and screamed as the heavy cassava bundle pulled her violently sideways. Her small body slammed against the weak bridge before both she and the cassava nearly disappeared into the rushing river below. The fishermen immediately dropped their nets and jumped into the water, while the terrified child held desperately onto the broken wood with trembling fingers, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Within moments, 2 of the men dragged her out of the riverbank mud. The cassava sticks scattered into the water while her tiny body shook uncontrollably from fear. And as one of the fishermen wrapped his old cloth around the crying child, he asked the question that made the entire riverbank suddenly go quiet. Whose child is this? And why is she carrying this kind of load alone? Amara lowered her eyes. Because even at that age, she already understood something painful. Sometimes the heaviest thing an orphan carries is not the firewood or the cassava or the hunger. It is the feeling that nobody is truly waiting for them to come home alive. What the men beside that river did not know that evening was that the frightened child they rescued from the water would one day become the same woman the entire village would admire, celebrate, and struggle to stand beside. And many years later, the people who once treated her like a burden would find themselves watching her return in a way nobody inside that compound was prepared for. The compound of Mama Ugochi sat at the far end of Umuazara village, behind 3 mango trees, whose shade nobody had ever thought to offer Amara. It was a crowded place, too many mouths, too little patience, and walls that seemed to absorb arguments the way dry earth absorbs rain, silently and without question. Amara had lived there since she was 4 years old, the year both her parents were taken within the same rainy season, her mother first to the illness that had no name, and her father, 3 months later, to grief that disguised itself as fever. She remembered very little of her parents. Sometimes, late at night, when the compound was quiet, she would try to reconstruct her mother's face from the feeling of being held, the particular warmth of arms that wanted her close, arms that did not need her to earn their embrace, but the memory always dissolved before it became solid. She was left holding only the outline of love without the substance of it, and perhaps that emptiness was what made Mama Ugochi's harshness so sharp. Not because cruelty was new, but because Amara could sense, somewhere beneath all the scolding and labour, the faint shape of what things could have been. Mama Ugochi was not a wicked woman in the way stories describe wickedness. She did not plot against the child or wish her harm in the dark. She was simply a woman worn thin by poverty and resentment, who had come to believe that softness was something only the comfortable could afford. She had her own 4 children to worry about, her own husband whose silences had grown longer each year, her own pride to protect from a village that watched everything and forgot nothing. Taking in her dead brother-in-law's child had been, in her mind, an act of charity. And charity, she believed, came with conditions. "You are eating my food," she told Amara often, not with cruelty exactly, but with the bluntness of someone reading a debt aloud. "You are sleeping under my roof. You will work for it." And Amara worked. She woke before the first cock crowed to fetch water from the stream 2 hills away. She swept the entire compound while the other children still slept. She cooked the morning ogi, carried firewood from the edge of the bush, helped in the farm on Saturdays, sold cassava by the roadside on market days, and at night she bathed the younger children before helping Adais with chores she was too proud to complete alone. There was always something else. There was always one more task, standing between Amara and whatever small moment of rest she had dared to imagine. OKK, the husband, watched most of this with eyes that saw more than his mouth ever said. He was a quiet man, not cold, not unkind, simply someone who had learned long ago that peace inside a difficult marriage required strategic silence. He knew the child was being worked beyond her years. He saw the way her small shoulders bent under loads meant for grown women. Once, when Amara returned limping from the farm with a cut on her foot that had not been properly cleaned, he had stopped her in the corridor, pressed a small coin into her hand, and said nothing except, "Go and buy groundnut." It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but it was all the courage he could find that day, and on most days his courage ran out before the moment demanded it. Adais, their eldest daughter, was 2 years older than Amara, and had grown up understanding, in the effortless way children understand power dynamics before they have words for them, that she occupied a different position in the household. She was not cruel to Amara, the way children in stories are cruel. She did not pinch her in hidden corners or steal her food. But she enjoyed her advantage the way someone enjoys a warm chair by the fire, without thinking about whether the person standing in the cold might also be cold. She wore the newer dress. She attended school without interruption. She was served first. These things were never spoken aloud. They simply were. It was Papa Eze who changed the temperature of Amara's world, even if only by a degree or 2. He was the oldest of the fishermen who had pulled her from the river that evening, a lean, weathered man whose face held the kind of patience that only comes from years of sitting still beside moving water. He had 3 grown children of his own and a wife who had died some years before, and he lived simply in a small house near the riverside with his son Obinya, who was 11 years old and had his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn gentleness. After the river incident, Papa Eze began watching for Amara on market days. Sometimes he would appear beside her as she arranged cassava for sale, setting down a small parcel of smoked fish wrapped in leaves without a word, then walking away before she could refuse. Sometimes he would find reasons to pass the compound during the hours she carried firewood, and he would take the heavier logs from the bundle with the casual indifference of a man just passing through, as though it had nothing to do with her at all. Mama Ugochi did not like it. "That old man is teaching you how to beg," she told Amara one evening, her voice sharp as the first cold of harmattan. "You think pity is kindness? It is not. It is people reminding you that you have nothing." Amara said nothing. She had learned early that silence was the cheapest form of survival. But she thought about what Papa Eze had done. And she thought about his son Obinna, who had once walked beside her, carrying the cassava basket all the way from the roadside to the compound, talking the entire time about a book he had read about a man who built a boat and sailed to a place nobody had been. He had not treated the silence between them like something to be filled. He had simply filled it, naturally, with the kind of words that made the distance shorter. School, for Amara, was a door that kept being closed. She attended when the compound permitted it, when the farm did not need her, when there was no younger child sick, when Mama Ugochi had not decided the night before that the market stall required an extra body. She fell behind in ways that humiliated her, arriving on days when the lesson had already moved 3 chapters forward, sitting in the back so the teacher would not call on her and reveal the gaps. But she never stopped wanting to learn. She could not explain the wanting. It lived inside her the way hunger lives, not politely, not quietly, but with a persistent, physical insistence that would not be denied simply because food was unavailable. She read whatever she found, old newspapers lining the shelves in the compound, torn exercise books the other children had discarded, a tattered biology textbook with half its pages missing that she kept hidden beneath the mat she slept on. On market days, when customers were few and the afternoon dragged, she would take out a discarded notebook she had found near the school fence and work through mathematics problems she had copied from a board she glimpsed through a classroom window during an errand. It was this habit that Madame Stella saw. Madame Stella had been teaching at Umuozara Primary School for 11 years and had the particular quality of a person who pays attention, not the performative attention of someone waiting to be impressed, but the quiet, continuous noticing of someone who understands that important things are often happening in corners. She had seen Amara before. The orphan girl from Ugochi's compound had heard the village's familiar story about her. But what she saw that afternoon on the roadside, as she returned from an errand to the market, was something the village's story had not included. The girl was working through long division in a worn notebook, her lips moving slightly with concentration, her cassava laid out in front of her unattended. She had not noticed Madame Stella stop. She did not notice until the teacher's shadow fell across the page, at which point Amara closed the notebook with the quick, guilty motion of someone caught doing something they expected to be punished for. "Let me see," Madame Stella said gently. Amara hesitated, then handed it over. The teacher turned through the pages slowly. Every problem attempted, most of them correct, and the ones that were wrong showed clear reasoning that had simply turned at a bad angle, the kind of errors that come from working alone without guidance, not from a mind that could not understand. "Who taught you this?" Madame Stella asked. "Nobody," Amara said quietly. I read it and then I try." Madame Stella handed the notebook back without another word that day, but she returned to the roadside the next market day, and the one after that. She began bringing things: a pencil, an exercise book, once a small mathematics primer that she placed on top of the cassava basket with the casualness of someone setting down a stone. Within a month, she was meeting Amara behind the school on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, in the hour before evening, when Amara could claim she was fetching firewood from the direction of the school without raising suspicion. For the first time in her life, Amara sat with an adult who looked at her and saw forward, not backward, into the compound, not sideways at everything she lacked, but forward into whatever she might become. "You have a good mind," Madame Stella told her once, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone stating the weather. "It would be a criminal waste not to use it." Amara did not know what to do with this information. She tucked it somewhere private and carried it carefully, the way she carried the coin Okeke had given her, not spending it, just keeping it close, feeling its weight, sometimes in the dark. Then the scholarship examination came. Madame Stella entered Amara without telling the compound. It was not deception. Exactly, it was simply the practical assessment of a woman who understood that asking permission would produce a refusal, and that some doors had to be opened before anyone realized they were there. The examination was held at the district school on a Saturday morning. Amara told Mama Ugochi she was going to help Madame Stella carry books. Okeke, who was awake when she left, asked no questions. Whether he suspected something or simply chose not to know, she never found out. She passed. Not just passed, she scored among the top 3 in the district. The scholarship would cover her secondary school fees entirely. Madame Stella and Papa Eze went together to the compound that evening to present the result to the family. Mama Ugochi did not celebrate. She sat listening with the expression of someone hearing information she had already decided was irrelevant, and when Madame Stella finished, she folded her hands in her lap and said, "Education is good for children who have fathers. Amara has nobody to take her anywhere after school. What is the use? The scholarship will take her," Madame Stella said carefully. "And when she finishes, who will she come back to? Who will negotiate her marriage? Who will speak for her?" Mama Ugochi shook her head. "Education fills a girl's head with ideas. It does not fill her stomach. I need her here." Papa Eze tried. He spoke gently and then less gently, appealing to pride, to the village's opinion, to the future, to the simple human investment in a child's life. Okeke sat in the corner and said nothing, though his jaw worked the way a man's jaw works when he is swallowing words that would cost him peace. In the end, the scholarship lapsed. But Madame Stella did not stop teaching her on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and Amara did not stop learning. She simply adjusted the size of her hope to fit the container available, the way she had learned to adjust everything else. Then Okeke fell ill. It came quietly, the way serious things often come, a cough that persisted past its welcome, a heaviness in his step that gradually became a lean against walls, then a stillness in bed that grew longer each day. The family's finances, already thin, became desperate. Mama Ugochi's energy, which had always been directed outward into management and complaint, now turned inward into a fear she did not know how to name. And Amara, the same orphan who was a burden, who was lucky to have somewhere to sleep, who had no father and therefore no future, became quietly and without ceremony the one who held things together. She took over the farm. She doubled her market days. She learned to negotiate prices with the shrewdness of someone who understood that every naira underfought was a meal lost. She nursed Okeke with a gentleness that surprised everyone, bathing his feet in warm water, bringing his medicine at the correct hours, sitting beside him in the early mornings before the compound woke up, not speaking much, just being present in the steady way she had always been present, unseen until needed, then suddenly essential. Okeke watched her during those mornings with the eyes of a man taking stock of his mistakes. One morning he said, "You are a good girl, Amara." It was not much, but it was more than he had ever given her, and it cost him something she could see. It cost him something, and so she received it without smallness. "Rest," she told him. "I will bring the medicine." Adais watched all of this with a complicated face. She worked too. During her father's illness, nobody could say she did not. But the compound had quietly reorganized itself around Amara's competence in a way that could not be argued with or undone, and Adais felt the shift in the way you feel a chair pulled from beneath you before you fully sit. Villagers who stopped by to check on Okeke would comment on the food, on the cleanliness of the compound, on Amara's strength and character. No one was saying anything against Adais. But every word in Amara's direction felt, to Adese, like a subtraction from herself. The argument, when it finally came, was not about a large thing. It was about pepper. Amara had sold the last of the dried pepper at market to cover the cost of Okeke's medication, not thinking to ask, because asking had never changed outcomes before. Mama Ugochi discovered this in the evening when she reached for the jar that should have held it. The argument that followed was not really about pepper. It was about everything that had been accumulating for years, every moment of resentment, every grudging meal, every time Amara had been present in the compound as a reminder of obligation rather than a source of joy. Mama Ugochi said things that evening that, once said, could not be unsaid. She spoke about bad luck that followed children born in certain ways. She spoke about the compound's suffering since Amara arrived. She spoke, finally, the word she had always circled but never landed on directly. "You do not belong here," she said. "You have never belonged here. Go and find wherever it is orphans belong." Amara stood still for a moment. The compound was quiet. Even the younger children had gone silent in the way children go silent when the air changes. Then she went inside, folded her 2 dresses into the small bag she owned, tucked Madame Stella's mathematics primer beneath them, and walked out of the compound before the next morning's light. She did not look back. She had already learned that looking back at things that did not want you was a way of teaching yourself to feel small, and she was done feeling small. The years that followed Amara's departure were not swift or merciful to the compound in Umuozara. Okeke recovered from his illness, then relapsed, then recovered again into a diminished version of himself that required more care than the family could easily provide without the invisible infrastructure Amara had maintained. Mama Ugochi managed, because Mama Ugochi was constitutionally incapable of not managing. But the compound aged, visibly small repairs unattended, the farm yielding less than it used to, the social warmth that comes from a well-run household gradually cooling. Adais married at 22, left for her husband's village, and found that the life she had imagined for herself was somewhat smaller than the imagining. She worked hard and was not unhappy, exactly. But she thought about Amara sometimes in the way you think about a road not taken, not with longing, but with a persistent, itching curiosity about where it might have led. The village mostly forgot Amara. Not maliciously, the way villagers forget anyone who leaves without a forwarding address. Life moved forward in Umuozara with the particular momentum of a place accustomed to losing its young, to cities and circumstance. New children were born, old men died, roofs were replaced, the dry season came and went and came again. Papa Eze grew older and fished less. Obinna, his son, left for the city to study engineering and returned on holidays with the self-conscious energy of a young man navigating two worlds. Papa Eze spoke about Amara sometimes, in the quiet evenings, the way you speak about something you almost caught, with a mixture of pride and sorrow that had no clean resolution. Madame Stella continued teaching. She told no one about the scholarship, or the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, or the girl who had solved mathematics problems in a discarded notebook by the roadside. Some things, she had learned, were not stories to tell. They were prayers to carry. Nobody knew what happened to Amara until the morning the cars arrived. The Village Development Committee had been expecting a donor, someone from the city, whose name had been passed between the right people, whose wealth was substantial enough to build the school annex and clinic that Zara had needed for a decade. There had been correspondence, arrangements, polite administrative letters. The name on the documents was a foundation, the kind of name that could belong to anyone, dignified, institutional, giving nothing away. The ceremony was set for a Saturday, which meant the entire village came. Mama Ugochi came in her good wrapper, the one she kept for occasions that required good wrappers, sitting in the front section that had been arranged for elders and notable families. Adais had returned from her husband's village for the event, sitting beside her mother with the composed expression of a woman who has made a separate peace with her life. Papa Eze sat near the back, his old body settled into his chair with the patience of someone used to waiting beside rivers. The vehicles were impressive, 3 of them, dark and quiet, parting the crowd with the gentle authority of things that do not need to announce themselves. Village children pressed forward to touch the hoods. Adults straightened their clothing without realizing they were doing it. Then the woman stepped out of the first car. She was not what the village expected. Not because of her clothes, though they were beautifully made, not flashy, but the understated quality of someone who no longer needed to prove anything with appearance. Not because of her bearing, though she carried herself with the particular confidence of a person who had crossed through fire and come out the other side, not hardened, but clarified. It was something in the face, a specific quality of having seen things, having survived things, and having chosen, in spite of them, to return. The recognition moved through the crowd, the way a flame moves down a line of oil. First one person, then the next, then a ripple of whispered names. Is that not? She cannot be. Amara, the orphan girl from Ugochi's compound? At the front of the gathering, Mama Ugochi's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally something that had no simple name. A collapsing of all the years between that night in the compound and this moment. Papa Eze, at the back, began to cry without covering his face. Madame Stella pressed both hands over her mouth and did not move. Amara walked to the stage. She greeted the village chairman, greeted the school board representative, greeted the gathered crowd with the ease of someone who had learned to stand in rooms where she was not expected and remain standing. And then she turned to face Zara, all of it, the faces she remembered and the ones she did not, the compound behind the mango trees, the riverside bridge visible at the village's edge, the schoolyard where she had once watched lessons through a window. She did not reach for drama. Her voice was steady. "I want to tell you about a child," she began, "who used to cross the bridge outside this village carrying cassava that was too heavy for her. She crossed it because she was afraid to go home empty-handed. not because going home was safe, but because going home empty-handed was worse. The crowd was completely still. She spoke about the water, about the cracked stick and the falling and the mud, about the fisherman who wrapped his old cloth around a trembling child and asked a question nobody had thought to ask before. She spoke about the compound not with bitterness, not cataloguing cruelties, but tracing the shape of loneliness with the precision of someone who had spent years understanding rather than blaming. She spoke about a teacher who met her behind a school building on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and treated her intelligence as a fact rather than a hope. She spoke about an old man who carried firewood without making it a lesson. Then she paused. "I am not here to judge what happened to me," she said quietly. "I am here because I chose to build something from it instead of being buried by it. And I am here because the child I was, the child standing on that bridge, shaking, she deserves to know that she mattered, that she was always worth something, even when she had nobody to tell her so." She let that settle. No child should ever have to earn the right to be loved. The words did not need to be loud to reach the back row. They landed in the particular silence that only truth creates. In the front section, Mama Ugochi's composure broke completely. It was not a performance. There was nothing performed about it. It was the private collapse of a woman confronted in full public daylight with the distance between who she had been and what she had told herself she was. She wept with her whole body, the way people weep when they have been holding something too long. Adéise put an arm around her mother's shoulders, her own face wet, and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Amara watched it from the stage and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not vindication, something quieter than both a closing, like a long open door gently coming to rest. After the ceremony, when the village had dispersed into the warm afternoon, Amara walked alone to the bridge. It had been rebuilt since her childhood, proper planks now, a railing on each side, the wood solid underfoot. The river beneath it moved with the same indifferent energy it had always had, unbothered by the things humans constructed over it or carried across it. She stood in the middle and looked down at the water for a long time. She thought about the child she had been. She did not romanticize that child's suffering. She knew too well how it had felt from the inside, the specific exhaustion of carrying both physical and invisible weight, the way loneliness sits differently from sadness, heavier and more shapeless. But she also knew what that child had done with it, how she had kept moving across a bridge that was cracking, how she had tucked a mathematics primer under a mat and refused to stop wanting the thing the world kept telling her she had no right to want. That child had been extraordinary. Not because of the suffering. Suffering is not extraordinary. It is merely common, but because of the insistence, quiet and undefeatable, on continuing toward something worth reaching. Papa Eze found her there. He walked slowly, his old body negotiating the railing as he came to stand beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The river spoke for them. "I thought about you," he said finally. "Every year." "I know," Amara said. "I should have done more." "You did what you could," she said. Not to excuse him. Exactly, she was past the age of needing to excuse people, but because it was true, and because she understood now the complicated interior of a good person navigating a world that does not always reward goodness with clarity. "The cloth you wrapped around me, I still remember how it felt." He turned to look at her, this old man who had pulled a child from the mud and asked a question that no one answered properly, and his face held everything the years between had cost him. "I named the foundation," she told him gently. "But the scholarships for the orphaned children, those are in Madame Stella's name. She will argue with me about it. She will say it is unnecessary, but it is necessary." Papa Eze nodded. He understood. They stood together a little longer. The old fisherman and the woman who had once been the frightened child he fished from the river, watching the water run beneath the rebuilt bridge as evening began pulling the light from the sky. The reconciliation with Mama Ugochi was not swift, and Amara did not pretend it would be. She visited the compound the following morning, alone, without ceremony. Mama Ugochi met her at the entrance with the expression of a woman standing in the rubble of something she had built herself and could not deny building. The compound looked smaller than Amara remembered, the mango trees larger, but the space between things somehow compressed, the way places from childhood always recalibrate themselves against the body's grown memory. They sat together in the shade. For a while, neither spoke. Then Mama Ugochi said, in a voice stripped of everything except the tired truth beneath it, "I did not know how to love without fear. I did not know how to do it." Amara considered this. It was not an excuse. She did not receive it as an excuse. But she understood that people are often limited not by cruelty but by the narrowness of their own experience, that a woman who was never shown tender love cannot simply produce it from nothing any more than a dry well can offer water. "I know," Amara said. "I did not come back to punish you. I came back because this is where I come from, and I refuse to let what happened here be the final word about either of us." Mama Ugochi cried again, quieter this time, the crying of someone beginning rather than ending. Adaeze came later that week, from her husband's village. She and Amara walked to the market together, the way they had once walked as children, neither ahead of the other. The conversation was careful and searching, full of the hesitations of people who have hurt each other by complicated means and are now attempting honesty without a map. It was not easy. It was not meant to be easy. But it was real, and it was a beginning, and beginnings are more valuable than resolutions. "I was jealous," Adaeze said finally, halfway between two market stalls, in the way people say true things in the middle of other activities, because saying them still is harder. "Even when we were children. I knew you were smarter. I knew it, and I hated knowing it. I knew you had what I wanted," Amara said. "Somewhere to belong without conditions." They looked at each other. Maybe we were both carrying things we should not have had to carry alone, Adaeze said. It was not forgiveness yet. It was the territory before forgiveness, the recognition that two people can be trapped in the same structure and hurt each other without either being simply the villain of the story. From that territory, with patience, other things were possible. In the months that followed, the new school opened. Orphaned children in Umuozara and 3 surrounding villages received scholarships that covered not just fees, but uniforms, books, and a monthly stipend. A small clinic at the compound's edge began seeing patients 2 days a week. Madame Stella, who retired from teaching the following year, agreed reluctantly to serve on the Foundation's advisory board, insisting, as Amara had predicted, that her name on the scholarship building was entirely unnecessary. "It is very necessary," Amara told her, "It makes me uncomfortable," Madame Stella said. "Good," Amara said, smiling. "Discomfort is sometimes how we know that something important is happening." Obinna came back to the village for the school's opening ceremony. He was an engineer now, with a quiet competence that his father had given him, and a warmth that was entirely his own. He and Amara stood together near the bridge after the ceremony, the way they had stood side by side years ago carrying cassava, and the distance and the years collapsed into something more honest, a recognition of what they had been to each other in a difficult season, and a tentative wondering about what they might yet be. They did not rush it. Some things are worth crossing slowly. On the last evening before Amara returned to the city, she walked through the village alone at dusk, past the compound, past the market stalls closing for the day, past the school with its new windows catching the last of the light. She walked to the bridge one final time and stopped in the middle. Downstream, a group of children were playing at the riverbank, their laughter rising into the cooling air without restraint. Two of them were carrying something together, a bundle of sticks that was clearly lighter for being shared, and as they reached the bridge's edge, an older child stepped forward and took the bundle gently from the smaller one, helping them across without being asked. Amara watched this without moving. She thought about the weight she had carried across this bridge. Not just the cassava, the other weight, the older and heavier kind that had no name in any language she knew, but that she had felt in every bone of her small body on the evening she almost fell into the river. The weight of being unclaimed, of belonging nowhere and to no one, of moving through the world without the knowledge that someone, somewhere, was genuinely hoping you would arrive safely. She had survived it. More than survived, she had built something from it that would outlast her, that would find the children who carried that same invisible weight and remind them, through scholarship and school walls and the plain material fact of investment in their futures, that they were worth something, that they had always been worth something, that no child should ever have to earn the right to be loved. The river moved beneath her, indifferent and continuous, the same river that had nearly swallowed her, the same water that the fisherman had waded into without thinking. Upstream, the evening star appeared. Somewhere in the village, a woman was calling her children in for supper. Amara stood on the rebuilt bridge and breathed the familiar air of the place that had broken her and made her both, and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, completely and simply at peace. Because sometimes the people the world throws away become the very people who teach others how to love better. And sometimes they come home not to reclaim the pain, but to transform it into something the next child crossing the river will never have to carry alone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification, because we bring to you real-life stories that will inspire you. God bless you and see you in the next video. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.